Hello, future professionals. In today's challenge of day 1, we have the question: calculate the sum of two numbers and print it. We will implement this using Python programming language. Eager to solve? Why wait? Let's dive in. Calculating the sum of two numbers and printing it can be implemented in multiple ways, out of which we will be implementing it in four ways. First of which would be to calculate the sum and print it without the user's input, under which we have two ways, that is, first is to do the sum operation within the print statement, and second will be storing the sum value onto output variable and printing it. Second method is to get the user's input and then calculate the sum and print the output. Third method is a step ahead of what we have done so far. That is, in this method, we validate the user's input before we calculate the sum. Fourth and the last method is to use function and function calls to implement this program. Under the first method, we calculate the sum of two numbers and print the value without getting the user's input, under which the first one is to perform the operation within the print statement. Let's initialize the value of A to 10 and B to 20. Then let's perform the operation, that is the sum operation, within the print statement. Let's run the code, and now we get the output as 30, which is 10 plus 20, that is 30. The first way under first method is done. Now we move on to the second way under the first method, that is storing the value of sum onto output variable and printing the output variable. Let's initialize the value of A to 10 and B to 20, or let's say 30. Now we store the value of sum of A and B, that is A plus B, into C and print the value of C. Let's execute the program. It gives us the output as 40, which is 10 plus 30, which is 40. The second way under the first method is done. Let's now move on to the second method. The second method involves to get the user's input and then calculate the sum of two numbers and then print it. Here I have mentioned the explicit type conversion. Why have I mentioned it? We'll get to know in few seconds. Let's initialize A. We all know that input function is used to get the input from the user. Let's now try to add the value of A and B and store it in C and print the value of C. Let's execute the program. Here I enter the value of A as 10 and B as 50. We should have got 60, right? But let's look at the output. Why is it 1050? Because we have to know that the return data type of the input function is string. So we must explicitly convert the string data type into integer data type so that we get the intended results. Now that we have converted that string data type onto an integer data type, let's now run the program. Let's enter the same value as 10 and 50. Now we get the output as 60. Let's now move on to the third method, that is to validate the user's input, under which we have two ways, that is to validate the user's input using the string method, and the second is to use the membership operator. Let's now implement the code using the string validation method. We shall initialize the value of A by getting the value from the user. Now we will verify whether the user's input is valid or not using isNumeric, which is a string method to check whether all the characters that are given in the string belongs to numbers. Now we will convert the type of A into int. Then calculate the sum of A and B and print the value of the sum. Now let's execute the program. Now if I enter 10 as the value of A and 50 as value of B, I still get the same result, that is 60. That is 10 plus 50 is 60. What if by mistake the user enters an invalid input, that is the value of A as A and B as 50? Here we don't get the error, right? We don't get the value. Instead, we would have got an error, which was avoided because we validated the user's input, right? The third method is done. Let's now move on to validating the user's input using membership operator. Here, now let's create a list which we'll name it as number list, and create a list which contains character type of numbers. Now we'll check the membership of A in the number list and B in number list. We all know that in operator is a membership operator. Now that A is in the number list and B is in the number list, we can now convert the string data type onto an integer data type. Let's now calculate the sum of A and B and print the sum. Let me give the value of A as 10 and B as 50. And why is it not working? Because it only checked whether the input belonged to a single digit number and not a two digit number. Let's now verify with a single digit number, that is 1 and 2. We get the output as 3. This is the limitation of using membership operator, wherein we cannot enter the various numbers that can be given by a user. Rather, we all use, or rather we prefer to use isNumeric as a way to validate whether the string contains numbers or not. The second way under the third method is done. Let's now move on to the fourth method and the last method, that is implementing the program using functions. In here we have two ways of implementing it, wherein we define a function without return statement and define a function with the return statement. Let's now create a program wherein the function does not return any value. Sum of numbers, getting the parameters as A and B. We calculate the sum of A and B and print the sum. Here we'll get the value of A and get the value of b. Now we shall call the function sum of numbers and pass the value of a and b to the function. Now let's run the program. It shows an error wherein I have mistakenly given an extra s. So let's now run the program. It asks me for the value of a, which I give it as 10, and b's value as 50, and we get the value of output as 60, and we get the sum as 60. The first way under fourth method is done. Let's now move on to the second way under the fourth method. That is to define a function with return statement. We'll define a function sum of numbers 2. Why is it 2? Because to avoid confusion, I define it as sum of numbers 2. That is, calculate the sum of a and b and return the sum. Since we are returning a value, we must store it in the output variable, which I define it as result. Sum of number 2, a and b, and let's now get the value of a and b. Now let's run the program. But wait, we haven't printed it. Let's now run the program. It asks me for the value of a, which I give it as 10, and b as 50, and I get the value as 60, which is 10 plus 50 is 60. The second way under the fourth method is done. Now that we have finished the 4 ways of implementing this program, as a bonus, we look at the production level code. The production level code, we have separate functions that does the separate functions or separate operations. Let's now look at the different functions in deep. We have the first function as sum of numbers 3, where it takes two parameters a and b with which it calculates the sum and returns the sum. The second function is to get the user's input, wherein the code gets the user's input and stores in the a and b variable. And next it calls the validate numbers function, which moves the control to the validate number function, where it gets two parameters a and b, and it checks whether the input given by the user is numbers or numeric. After both conditions satisfy, we then call the convert to int function, where we pass a and b. Now the control statement passes here. Under this function, we convert the string data type into an integer data type and return both a and b. Now that the return value is stored in result, and if the result is true, wherein if there is no null value, then we call on the function sum of numbers, where we calculate the sum of both numbers. Now that this function returns a value, we store it in the output variable and we call the next function, which is print output, and pass the output value. Now that the control is passed on to the print output, here we print the output. Now let's execute the program. It is asking me the value of a, which I give it as 10, and b as 50. Now we get the value as 60. What if by mistake the user enters an invalid input, that is a's value is a and b's value is 10? Here it gives me an error message which says Enter a valid number. This is a warning to the user to enter a valid number. Let me now enter a valid number 10 and 20. Now that I am getting a result as 30, which I intended as 10 plus 20 is 30. Thank you all for watching this video. Hope you have benefited from the video. Follow us to watch more informative videos.